Afternoon, folks. Well, it's been a bit of a while since I last came on and spoke to everybody. So, hello. I'm back. Today, I brought you down with me to a little place that I love going on the coast. It's in just outside a little village called Burton Bradstock, and it's a place called Hyde Beach. And it's down on the Dorset coastline. There you go. You can see it's a beautiful sunny day. You have the sea. I tend to move slightly down from the cafe, the Hyde Beach Cafe, where most people congregate, but it's kind of in the height of summer, and this is, well, I'll be heading down that way, and it's relatively clear. Again, it's on the Jurassic Coastline. If I show you and just move the camera up slightly there, you can see that the cliffs can be a bit unstable around here, so they kind of get cliff falls and you kind of get fossils exposed and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just a beautiful place to come. What do I want to talk about today? Well, if you've seen my last article or read my last article, I was talking about single page applications, but specifically I was talking about something that I call the ACME pattern. I'll give it its full title, the ACME pattern for resource authorization, and how it can really help to enable a much better experience, both from a user's perspective but also from a developer's perspective, allocating access tokens and how to store those, but also access control. And access control both from an API perspective and informing the user interface as well. Specifically in this video, I'm going to show you the ACME pattern in action. Now, in the B2B SaaS application that I'm building, which is all about theatrical production management, I'm going to be taking some functionality from that, and I'm going to be re-implementing it or reimagining it as a sample for the ACME protocol. Now, if you've read one of my previous articles, you'll know that I do a lot of theatrical PA, a lot of the B2B SaaS stuff that I've been building is what I like to term as cooked by wok, and that's all about leveraging WordPress, OpenFGA and Keycloak to provide a full range of B2B SaaS functionality. So everything from authentication and authorization through access control as part of customer identity and access management, but then going on to all of that stuff that you tend to need for a B2B SaaS application, including per subscription branding, subscriptions in their own right, administration from a subscriber perspective, administration from a provider perspective, delegated administration, and database isolation, and just the whole multi-tenancy thing. So I'm going to show you first of all a aspect of Theatrical PA in context of Theatrical PA, and then I'm going to pull apart one particular component of that and switch it into a kind of development perspective, what that looks like from a user interface point of view, and what that looks like from a functionality point of view, as folks call APIs. So I found a good spot to park on quite an interesting, let me kind of come in there and show you. In fact, I'll see what I'll do. There you go. I've spun round and you can see the kind of a rock with the rock pool type pits in it that I have found to just perch on. The sea comes all the way in. You can see a rockfall, particularly large one, down the beach here, and the sea comes all the way in up to the cliffs. So it's quite good to keep an eye on the tide and what the tide's doing. Down there in the distance, I'll just zoom in on that. Those are the cliffs from West Bay, and just beyond that you head off towards Golden Cap, which is over there in the distance. So let's start off by showing you one of probably the key features of Theatrical PA, which is a production management feature in Theatrical PA. And here's a typical production page. The page will contain the production team, which is typically put together by members of the production company who have the authority to do that. I'll kind of elaborate on that in a little more detail a little later on. And you'll have aspects of the production schedule, particularly the rehearsals, which folks will be able to see if they have the authority to see it, and also if they have the authority to interact with it. So there's an and or situation there where some stuff could be read-only, some stuff could be rewrite, some stuff could be interactive as well, depending on who you are, depending on the role that you play in the show. And interestingly, because in my case I am leveraging OpenFGA, interestingly, what you've been allowed to do on a more granular basis, so going beyond just roles and going into what's termed relationship-based access control models that give you a finer granularity. Okay, so now I'm going to take just the team aspect of that, and I'm going to bring in to play essentially a development view of just the team function. Now, I don't know how you build software. I'm building software using WordPress, like I say, as the technology stack scaffolding for my B2B SaaS. And WordPress is by default a regular web application. So my interactions with me submitting and saving and updates and everything like that is a two-way communication between me and the web server. So me as the user and the client, which is the browser, and the web server. So it's a typical regular web application. But what I'm doing is I'm integrating SPA capability, and then those individual components that you saw before, so the teams, the scheduling, and all the other sorts of things, are in effect React components that get rendered on that page and then interact with the user using an API. Now, my implementation, I am going to be using ACME. So the Access Control Mediation Endpoint Protocol for resource authorization. And in my last article, I kind of highlighted or outlined how ACME actually works. And it's kind of a cross between endpoint mediation pattern and also the BFF, the back end for front end pattern, but essentially allows you to collapse most of that functionality into the API itself, so that you don't have to end up, well, specifically in the case of a BFF, building what's effectively a shim onto your API. But then ACME goes on to do a lot more, in that it essentially allows you to bring access control into the mix, and it also handles all the token management from a SPA perspective as well. And in my previous article, I discussed how managing securely tokens in a SPA can be a challenge. In my article previous to that, or prior to that, I talked about storage conundrums when it comes to single page applications. So I'm going to show you how you can really mitigate all of those and wrap everything up in a very nice bow from the perspective of authentication, authorization from a consent aspect, and also authorization from an access control perspective, with the security and everything else using the ACME pattern. For the purpose of illustration, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to essentially show you a development view on just the team, and just the team section of that production page that I showed you. And I'm going to enable consent processing from a first factor authentication perspective. Now, if you're building a first party application and a first party API, which is essentially an application that you build and an API that you build as part of that application, then consent becomes kind of implied most of the time, because if you've got a user and that user is using your application, then by implication they're using all of the features and capabilities that they're allowed to use as part of that application. So getting their consent to use something is a little immaterial. So most customer identity and access management implementations allow you to skip consent processing from an OAuth 2 perspective for first party applications and first party APIs. But consent, and the reason why I'm going to use consent, is handy twofold. First of all, it's an easy way to show you how, if a user doesn't have a particular scope, and that may be because they are, well, they've not provided consent, which I'll go on to in just a second, or it may be because of some access control modeling that you've got implemented as part of the ACME SaaS implementation that you're integrating with. A lot of vendors give the ability to do rudimentary role-based access control as part of your ACME implementation. Then certain scopes you might not have. So I'm going to enable consent because that'll allow me to control the consent and what I consent to. But it's also really useful from the perspective of AI. So today we have AI agents that can act on our behalf, and with MCP, Model Context Protocol, that can come into play quite a lot, and we need to, as users, consent to the agent acting on our behalf when calling an API or accessing a resource. And so consent is something that, most people think, oh, we don't need to worry too much about with first-party applications, but actually when you're using AI and you're using AI agents, consent is really valuable from a processing perspective within the scope of OAuth 2 and the OAuth 2.1 spec. 2.0, 2.1, both of those specifications. So I'm going to use consent as a kind of double whammy, really, to give me the ability to show you this stuff selectively. So let's start with a user who has full access to everything, has fully consented, full access to everything, and let's see what they can see in this kind of development preview of the actual team widget that's coded in React. And I'll show you some of the React code as well, and I'll show you what that React code is doing. And here you can see that in use effect, we start off when the page first loads by making a call to that authority endpoint, the authorized endpoint within the API itself, and effectively getting a list of permissions which are directly related to the scopes that I have requested and be granted via that processing that goes on as part of the call to the authority endpoint, which says, I'm going to use the, if you like, mediation token and use that for the API itself within the scope of the ACME protocol or the ACME pattern implementation, that the API then effectively goes to the authorization server to get that fully authorized scope token. And here actually is the implementation that actually renders the display, and you can see here where I'm using aspects of the permissions that I get back from the authority endpoint to actually display what's on the page. So if I have the ability to add a new team member, then I'll show a button, or if I have the ability to delete someone from the team or change their role or any of those things, I can make those changes. And this is all using essentially a relationship-based access control mechanism that is implemented on using OpenFGA. I'm not going to go into details on that in this video, but I will be covering that in future articles and future videos as well. All of this is being enabled by my identity, and it's also being enabled by the relationships that are built in OpenFGA associated with that identity, including and incorporating the consent I provided from an access control mechanism. Okay, so let's now switch it up. Let me log out. Let's switch it up and essentially look at what would happen if, from a consent basis, I changed my the consent that effectively I was providing just from an OAuth 2 access token perspective. So now I've logged off, logged back on, and I'm changing my consent. And now you can see effectively what I would see as a user who has little to no access. The same processing has gone through the workflow in the application, and leveraging ACME, the application has not changed at all, but I've got different information coming back from the authority, or the API authority, and essentially that info can then allow me to inform the UI and the user of what they have the capability to do. And that's all facilitated by the ACME pattern. I think I've been, maybe in parts I've called it the ACME protocol. I think it should be a protocol. I shall lobby to do something about that. But certainly that's all facilitated by the ACME pattern. Let's put my mic back so that you can actually hear me, hopefully. Okay. It's just a brief taster of what you can do leveraging the ACME protocol or the ACME pattern. And it's a brief taster of how you can build that capability into your application and obviously your APIs as well to do, well, the access control capability that will inform the UI and inform the capabilities available to the user. So that's it for now. There are a couple of gents coming up here on hoverboards, so I'm just going to move around that way. Hopefully you can see. Or maybe you can't. I think they've just fallen down in the water. So that's it for this episode. All that's left for me to do is say happy coding, happy vibe coding, happy working with AI, happy integrating with SIAM, and I will catch you all on the next episode. Take care and have fun. Take care. Bye-bye.